This is part 2 of the lecture to accompany Chapter 17 in your textbook. I highly recommend you read Chapter 17 as it contains information you may find helpful, but I just don't have time to address in this lecture. You may pause and replay this video as often as you need to. Okay, let's continue with the lecture. The first way in which audiences are persuaded is through ethos. This has to do with the audience's perception of the speaker's competence and character. Remember that this is the audience's impression of you, not your impression of yourself. Self-esteem is great, and it may certainly help influence the audience when they see that you are very self-assured. But if they don't think they can trust you to give them correct information, or if they're not sure that you have their best interests at heart, they may not believe you. A speaker's initial credibility, the credibility before the speech, could be low or high, depending on their previous knowledge of you. Or it could be non-existent if they don't know anything about you. Then, during the speech, it's going to change depending on what you do and say. It could go up if you appear to know what you're talking about. It could go down if it's evident that you haven't done your homework. Ideally, you want your terminal credibility, the credibility that you have with the audience at the end of the speech, to be higher than when you begin to speak. So, how do you gain credibility with your audience? First, make sure that you are prepared to speak. If you appear to be well prepared, the audience will grant you credibility. Make sure you address the credibility step in the introduction of your speech. Explain your connection to the topic and why you are competent to speak to it. Especially when you know there may be hostile audience members, establish common ground with them. Let them know that you have things in common with them, you understand where they're coming from, and especially that you hope that they will listen to your side. If you speak with conviction, your audience will be impressed. The second way in which audiences are persuaded is through logos, or logic. Humans like to think that they are rational, logical creatures, and when someone tries to convince us of something, our natural inclination is to say, well, prove it. We prove things through the use of evidence and reasoning. Evidence is all the supporting material we find in our research, and reasoning helps to link the evidence back to the claim so the audience can see that it proves our point. All the things we talked about before are supporting materials. Facts, statistics, examples, and testimony are referred to as evidence in persuasive speeches. In your research, you're looking for things that help show the audience that the things that you're saying are true. Remember, what people find interesting is also what they find compelling. Stories that illustrate a problem, statistics that show how big that problem is, and testimony from experts that corroborate those findings. All these things must be used to prove your point. Simply saying something is true is not enough. It needs to be specific. The best evidence is not vague or only generally related to your topic. It specifically supports the claim you are making. Novel evidence, and by novel I mean new evidence that the audience hasn't heard before, is also very compelling. And of course, your evidence needs to be from credible, believable sources. You also need to make sure that the audience understands why you're using certain pieces of evidence. Now, evidence is critical to a good argument, but if you just throw evidence out there and don't explain to the audience how it supports your claim, it's really not an argument. You've got to lead us to the conclusion by helping guide our thought process, by showing us how the evidence makes the claim true. You do this through reasoning, and there are 4 major ways in which we reason. We reason by using specific instances. This is also called inductive reasoning or reasoning by example. We also reason by applying generally accepted principles to individual situations. That's also known as deductive reasoning. We link causes to their effects, and that's causal reasoning. And we compare things and reason that because they are similar, they probably share similar qualities. That's analogical reasoning. In Part 3 of this lecture, we will look at each of these types. This ends Part 2 of the lecture accompanying Chapter 17. Please close this file and open Part 3.